Hello and welcome to State of Play on MintPress News and Behind the Headlines, your Monday evening news stream where we examine, uh, well, the most consequential international news story and break it down from a perspective/vantage that you won't find anywhere else, which includes other dirty left platforms. And I am your host, Greg Stoker. And today we are going to be examining the Russia-Ukraine 28-point peace proposal and counter proposal sent by the European Union today. We will be talking about some policy drivers in the background that aren't being given nearly enough attention, mainly the deindustrialized U.S. military complex and how a lack of TNT production is impacting U.S. policy towards Israel, who has used a good portion of our Mark 80 bombs on Gaza and was thus pressured to accept a ceasefire and curtail their infinite thirst for American ordnance because we've got Venezuela, Ukraine, and Taiwan to worry about. So, and we're going to also be talking about how this peace deal isn't great for anyone besides the United States. It's about trying to separate Russia from China in terms of forming a more united counter-American front and make a bunch of money off Ukraine's post-war redevelopment via, investing billions of dollars of stolen Russian assets and so much more. Also involves some pretty embarrassing saber rattling from Europe. But before we get into all of that, sorry about the lackluster hotel back room. I'm currently in Kentucky for a wrongful conviction evidentiary hearing for a guy who didn't do it. For more info on that, and if you like investigative true crime, check out Bone Valley Season 3, Graves County podcast. So that's what I'm doing in this neck of the woods. So anyways, MintPress News plug. Over here, we are a small independent newsroom with no corporate sponsors. And if you're picking up what we're putting down and want to support independent watchdog journalism, consider throwing us $10 a month, $5 a month. I don't know what the Patreon subscription is right now. If you want to help out, that's how we're primarily funded. So the link should be in the description. And I guess we're going to get started. We're just glad you're here. If you're getting nickeled and dimed in the hellscape of late stage suicidal capitalism, we're just happy that you're watching this. If you can like, share, and subscribe, and maybe drop a comment because it pushes the engagement, we would really appreciate it. Plug over with. So, Trump, and when I say Trump, I mean he gave the head nod, didn't come up with it, this peace plan. For the Russia-Ukraine war is not good for anybody except the U.S. This is great power politics. I think at its most bald face, we're going to go through this point by point. Well, we might with the EU counter proposal that they just published today because it's pretty hilarious and completely detached from any sort of reality. But again, this is great power politics at its most bald face. We aren't going to go through, this stuff entirely, but the main takeaway is that it manages to sideline Russia, Ukraine, and the EU all at the same time. Essentially, it's a mechanism by which American private equity and various companies with ventures and redevelopment can seize a third of frozen Russian assets to reinvest into Ukraine, with the U.S. taking in a bulk of the profits, or at least half, it says. While the conditions for unfreezing the other 2/3 require turning those funds into a partnered U.S.-Russian joint investment in AI and mining, tempting them away from China's AI sphere of influence handled by Washington, and returning Russia to the G8, which was suspended from in 2014 during the annexation of Crimea. And then I think it formally left in 2017. So literally leveraging seized Russian assets in order to compel them not to de-dollarize, essentially, if you look into it, because this plan is a means to destabilize, multipolarity and challenge to the dollar while U.S. corporations make bank off war-torn Ukraine and stolen Russian wealth. So the EU, which we're going to look at soon when we bring on our guest, has just published an unworkable counter proposal. It's expected to match it financially, which of course means stripping even more state industries and welfare from working class Europeans. And yes, folks, imperial wars are always transnational wars upon the working class, as we've seen from Gaza. And this plan would also require Russia to surrender its largest nuclear power plant into AE hands, another U.S. overseen institution. But now the Zaporizhia plant de jure belongs to a Ukrainian energy company in de jure Ukrainian territory, but it's de facto controlled by the Russian military. This is more of a win some, lose some agenda item that a lot of people are wasting a lot of time talking about. But the bottom line is no one's accepting this proposal because it sucks for everyone. And of course, the EU has already ginned up another plan ripe for ridicule. Full of more warmongering and war economy nonsense, which the Kremlin has already rejected today because realpolitik, they're in a much stronger negotiating position. And NATO, with its one TNT plant in Poland, doesn't really have teeth. But I love the confidence coming from these decaying former imperial powers who are trying to pretend like they aren't vassals of U.S. imperium. So German Chancellor, actually, Friedrich Merz, said on Saturday that ending the crisis in Ukraine requires the consent of both Ukraine and its European partners rather than major powers. Guys, please still include us, okay? The only way it's going to work is if the EU signs off on it. Merz also noted that reliable security guarantees must be established for Ukraine. While acknowledging there is currently a chance to end the conflict, he cautioned that the parties remain far from a common satisfactory result. And that was Saturday, still true today. We know that President Trump made this really aggressive Thanksgiving deadline. He of course does these like saber rattling, like ultimatum type proclamations, that pick arbitrary dates that like Americans can understand. No, it better be done by Thanksgiving, better be done by Black Friday. But behind all of this is we can kind of see like some parallels to one of the reasons like Israel had to like stop, because we didn't have like the same amount of military aid. There are stockpile issues. There are huge, with the semi-collapse of, the front, the Ukrainian defensive front. They've lost a bunch of key towns recently, and it was a defensive line because after these key towns, and we can look at the map and stuff, and what the current military situation is, what we believe, it's just open fields, and they could potentially lose a whole lot more territory. And the Thanksgiving deadline, it's completely arbitrary, but there's a lot of like tactical and strategic realities behind the scenes that a lot of people aren't talking about. So to talk about that, we are joined today by friend of the show, Elina Xenofontos, geopolitical analyst and commentator, coming to us from Cyprus. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you for bringing me on, Greg. It's always a pleasure.
All right. So after the intro, I guess, is there any place you would like to start? I know there's so many different angles that we can approach. I definitely want to focus on the industrial aspects of, U.S. power projection and, our ability to wage proxy wars in the future, and this upcoming operation with Venezuela and Israel heightening its aggression in the south of Lebanon, apparently in a buildup to a war at the end. So let's start with this proposal and kind of what it means for Europe, because this story is moving very fast, and I think for like the rest of the day and then tomorrow, the EU counter proposal is like the thing to kind of like look at and focus on in the context of the first one, because like they kind of seem like they're still striving to assert any sort of relevance in like great power geopolitics, and it's not working.
Yeah. So right before this proposal actually was put through by Trump, the Europeans themselves were actually trying to find ways by which to continue financing Ukraine. And in fact, there was a deadline within the European Union, within European states, as to how they're about to do that. And it was just about a week, about a week ago, where Ursula von der Leyen had actually put forward 3 options that the Europeans had in order to do this. One of them was the reparations loan, which was her preferred choice and what the European sort of commission that she heads was kind of pushing. And what the reparation loans was basically appropriating a good chunk of Russia's frozen assets and using that to basically continue to fund Ukraine. That was the kind of preferred option that Ursula von der Leyen had. However, there isn't a unanimous acceptance of this within the European Union itself. So she said the other two options would be to provide grants, so give a bulk of money, which she didn't define how much that would be, to Ukraine in the form of grants, and those would have to be accumulated through each member state separately. And by grants means that they will not be getting this money back. And the third option would be to actually basically pull out a loan, even in the form of like a European loan, meaning that all member states would kind of be, as a collective, start pulling out loans in order to then indebt themselves in order to then be able to provide to Ukraine. And she even gave them a deadline. She even gave the other European member states a deadline by which to decide which process to take. And then all of a sudden, Trump comes through and makes this 28-point plan proposal that completely has thrown, to quote Euro News, it has thrown Europe into disarray, because where the preferred option was to take, to take the reparations loan option, which is using the Russian frozen assets, you saw Trump come in and basically state, listen, the United States is going to take control of 100 billion of the Russian frozen assets. And just for context here, there's about $300 billion in frozen assets at the moment. And the United States says that they want to take about 100 billion, and they're going to use that 100 billion in order to supposedly invest inside of Ukraine. And I just also want to put a little parenthesis here and say, when we're talking about investment inside of Ukraine, we were actually meaning this money will go directly into American corporations that will be, quote, rebuilding Ukraine, aka the American corporations are taking that money, not really the Ukrainians. And the remaining 200 billion, they wanted, as you said earlier, was to sort of set up this joint venture with Russia. But however, Russia isn't really going to be the one controlling those funds. It's going to be Washington deciding where this investment is going to go. So that means that the Europeans, based on Trump's proposal, no longer have the reparations loan option that Ursula was trying to pass through as a means to sponsor the war in Ukraine. And not just that, but under Trump's proposal, he demanded that Europeans must actually also provide, on top of the 100 billion that the United States is taking from the frozen assets, he demanded another 100 billion to come from the European Union itself. It doesn't matter where they get it from. They can cut more welfare programs. And in fact, actually, the leader of NATO, the chief of NATO, even said we might have to cut more welfare programs within NATO states if it means obviously continuing the war against Russia. And that's exactly what Trump's deal offered to Europeans. So he kicked them out of the ability to even have any sort of influence or control over the frozen Russian assets, and demands 100 billion from the European Union in order to help fund these operations inside of Ukraine. And in addition to all this, they don't have any actual say in Trump's proposal. They are not meant to participate in any part of these negotiations for them. I mean, outside, obviously, the negotiations with NATO, when it comes to the security task force that's going to be established, Trump's proposal only places the US and Russia in that security task proposal, who is going to be in charge to make sure that the deal is being enforced. Whereas the Europeans want in. Europe, the UK, they want to have a position in there as well. So it was a very demeaning, proposal towards Europe, which is why they've been the most outraged, because it kind of has solidified this idea that, unfortunately for them, they are no more than vassal states for the United States at this particular point. And this is a classic example of, yet again, how the United States is humiliating Europe, whilst also imposing on them the debt and burden of reconstructing Ukraine, and also making sure that they don't really have much of a say as to what goes on from there on. There's also a lot of other elements, but this is, I guess, the economic angle of all this.
Yeah, and there's kind of, I was not surprised when I saw this. Even going back to Trump's first presidency, he's always had a bone out for NATO and not fulfilling their like NATO commitments. He feels like, NATO's always been like a bad deal for the United States, and he's all about deals. So like, there's some ideology in this too. But yeah, look, it was even like reported by Axios. The main drivers behind this are like Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, who are all about, who are basically taking, in some ways, a template from like Gaza and what they're trying to do there, with this very vague 24-point like peace plan that's not entirely workable, and just kind of rebranding it and slapping it on this thing. It's going to be, overseen by a board of peace, and it's highly, highly beneficial to, American corporations that are going to go in there and plunder, whatever they can, and the Ukrainian government's not going to have a say about it. And it's just like it's like an IMF loan, but worse, because they're not going to have any agency or control, and that's just like the Gazans won't. And it's just like bald faced, the same, a very, very similar playbook with the same players as well. So like, I wasn't personally that surprised.
No, I mean, it's exactly like you said. It's a Gaza, the Gaza 20, was it 21.24? But these names, I can't remember how many points there were in the Gaza peace plan. I think it was a 2021. I can't
It
remember,
was
but
like
either way,
12, and then it was like 19 and 20. Yeah.
yeah, and
Yeah.
it just kept changing around. I mean, anyway, this peace plan project has become a blueprint now, and I guess not only that, but the sort of, I guess, the operations that are occurring in Gaza, the same thing that they're going to do in Ukraine. Like you said, now we're going to see, after the destruction of Ukraine in multiple different ways, we're going to see Western private capital enter inside Ukraine in order to obviously counteract their own, again, economic crisis back home, their own capital accumulation crisis. It's a new venture for investment opportunities within Ukraine. And, at the end of the day, I also wanted to bring my attention to one small, actually small, but yet very important factor. The fact of the matter is, back in July, BlackRock, which is basically, I guess, controlling the Ukrainian the Ukrainian fund to basically rebuild Ukraine, had actually halted all negotiations for this investment fund. And part of the reason they had actually done this at the time was because of the insecurity around Ukraine, because it's an ongoing war, because it wasn't attracting the right sort of investment, and therefore they weren't able to actually start building or making money off of the Ukraine project. And so, and when Trump came into power as well, the interest on investing within this fund for Ukraine had actually diminished significantly. So actually bringing about a ceasefire, also, again, we're seeing that this will benefit the private corporations, particularly, BlackRock and these American multinational corporations that are now basically controlling and they own. I mean, they're in charge of the entire rebuilding, reconstructing of Ukraine. This suits them because at this particular point, we'll get to this in a little bit when we discuss the deindustrialization of the U.S., et cetera, and why this, and the military angle for why the ceasefire is necessary. But from an economics perspective as well, part of the reason is you need some sort of at least temporary peace for a period of time in order to track the level of investment necessary, because right now you have Ukraine that is draining the military stockpiles of the United States, and which you can't make up for rapidly enough, especially with the other ongoing wars, which again we'll discuss in a little bit. But there's not even any investment going into its reconstruction funds because of the ongoing war. So if you want to sustain the financial bubble, your stock market bubbles for all these companies, and you want to start seeing money, coming into these investment projects, you do need to provide the basis for these operations to take place, for investors to feel secure enough to begin investing in these funds, even public and private investors. So, I mean, that's the one angle. And, with regards to the Europeans as well, this is the other irony as well behind them. When you start thinking about what the United States was offering Europe here in terms of their position in all this, if Europe was to begin truly issue bonds and pull debt in order to help Ukraine, again, that would actually benefit the United States, because a lot of these finance corporations would be the ones to issue these particular bonds within the financial markets, that will actually give them a huge amount of profits. But in the same time, what will that do to the euro? It will cause the euro to depreciate, giving the United States even greater leverage over the European markets, the European economies that are already so overly reliant on the United States since 2022. Obviously, obviously when they began cutting ties with Russia and becoming so overly dependent on the American markets for like energy, for American LNG. So this entire operation, the Trump proposal, is very much in favor of the United States. They're taking all of Russia's frozen assets, they're investing it in their corporations, which is free money for them. They're going to generate they're going to generate mass profits off of that, secure their stock market bubble as it currently is, and in doing that, they will also capitalize because they also want 50% of those profits, and they want complete control over gas pipelines and all the most, valuable infrastructure in Ukraine. And the Europeans get nothing but even more debt in order to reconstruct Ukraine. And just one last thing, it's also rather funny because most of the damage, according to the reports that we're seeing in Ukraine anyway, is in the eastern parts of Ukraine, which is Russian held at this point. And Russia's pretty much building that territory up, especially if they do keep the territory that we're discussing in question. So a lot of this money it's just a massive Ponzi scheme for a lot of these corporations to make money. And the Europeans are cashing out the debt to do that.
Yeah. So, I mean, just like all of our wars in some ways. So let's look at the European clapback. Full text of European counterproposal to U.S.-Ukraine peace plan. So this came out last night, which would be early morning in Europe today. So below is the text of the European counterproposal, drafted by Europe's E3 powers of Britain, France, and Germany, takes the U.S. plan as its basis, but then goes through it point by point with suggested changes and deletions. I almost read that as suggested changes and delusions, but I guess that was kind of like a
very accurate, if you ask me, probably more accurate.
Okay, one, Ukraine's sovereignty is to be reconfirmed. Okay. There will be a total and complete non-aggression agreement reached between Russia and Ukraine and NATO. All ambiguities from the last 30 years will be resolved. What? Okay, cool. That would be nice, but good luck. Okay, point 3 of the U.S. plan is deleted. A draft of that plan seen by Reuters. There will be the expectation that Russia will not invade its neighbors and NATO will not expand further.
I wanted to highlight that very quickly because it's actually very important because
it was deleted.
So on Trump's plan, this was probably one of the most important points because on Trump's plan, yes, the proposal was that Russia, yes, will not invade its neighbors, NATO, et cetera. And he promised no further expansionism. And this was one of the critical points as well for Russia in terms of its own security, that they did not want any more NATO expansion. And the other major point, and this was considered as a major concession by Western media outlets, this is how they were reporting it, was that the United States had promised, or like part of the deal was that they would force Ukraine to enshrine within their own constitution that they will not join NATO, which was considered to be a major concession. However, and this is the important thing, this is one of the things that the Europeans removed. Whereas in the Trump plan, the Ukrainians were obliged to not join NATO. It also does highlight that the security guarantees that will be provided to Ukraine in order to do so would be that if Russia was to break the ceasefire or attack Ukraine at any particular point, it would be considered as an attack, and I quote this, as an attack on the entire transatlantic community. So what we have is a NATO-style security guarantee, which mimics that of Article 5. So the jury, the Trump proposal, actually claims that, right, we are not going to allow Ukraine to be a part of NATO, but de facto, the security guarantee is treating Ukraine as if it is a member of NATO. And that, for many, was considered to be a concession, but it's not a concession. It's just another way, as if the Russians are stupid, it's another way to say, oh, right, they don't have to be part of NATO, but they kind of are. Technically, they kind of are. And even that, the Europeans removed it. It was one of the points that was revised in the European counter proposal. And they said that will not basically happen, and that Ukraine will still have the right to enter NATO, and that only NATO has a discretion by which to decide that. The member states will decide that. So even that, the Europeans, where the United States is trying to play a bit of a smarter game here, supposedly smarter, the Europeans had to come and take that out as well. I think it was in one of the first few points.
Yeah, and just continuing to go through it, a U.S. NATO agrees to not permanently station troops under its command in Ukraine in peacetime. NATO fighter jets will be stationed in Poland. U.S. guarantee that mirrors Article 5, which is effectively like a NATO move. U.S. to receive compensation for the guarantee. Yeah, a bunch of stipulations if Russia invades Ukraine.
They also, I don't know if you can notice, they actually removed everything with regards to the frozen assets because they disagree with the US's approach on taking the frozen assets for those uses, and that if there is going to be any sort of joint project, the European counter proposal wants to be a part of that process. So we can see how they've gotten rid of that, including the demands for 100 billion from the EU. So they also got rid of that. It's sort of it's the Europeans' way of trying to show some face that they are still a peer, I guess, within these negotiations and to be treated as such. But clearly, that's not the case.
Appear like as a united bloc that represents Western Europe. But like 12 is interesting. The robust global redevelopment package for Ukraine. High growth industries, data centers, and AI efforts. The U.S. will partner with Ukraine to restore, grow, modernize their gas infrastructure. Sure, we've got mineral and natural resource extraction. A special financing package will be developed by the World Bank to provide financing to accelerate these efforts. The World Bank, not frozen Russian assets. Yeah, I mean, this is kind of, reminiscent of the last one, except, it's cutting as you mentioned, the Russian assets out of it to be used for that.
Yeah, and it's also quite interesting because one other thing that the United States did that the Europeans took out was that the Trump's proposal also did actually identify for the first time that there is a neo-Nazi, I guess, issue within the political governance or the military within Ukraine, and that should be dealt with within their school system and also legislatively, which some would consider to be a major concession, although technically it's not, because even the European Council report 2019 echoed this particular sentiment, but I guess they've forgotten these particular reports. But the Europeans have also taken that out. But yeah, it's very interesting to see the Europeans not understand their particular position in this. And I will just make this point. Russia is winning this war. Even the United States proposal of basically trying to trap Russia into a situation where their frozen assets are taken. They have to make territorial, I guess, concessions to give the power of the Zaporozhye power plant. And I want to focus on this as well a little bit because the Zaporozhye power plant is the largest nuclear power plant in Europe. He who controls that can also exert a lot of economic sort of pressure and control and warfare. And that right now is solely and strictly, and has been for a while, under Russian control. And the United States proposal, as well as that of the Europeans, is to have that handed over to the IAEA. And that, again, is a very Western-dominated institution, with the United States being the key and largest funder, and therefore with the greatest political influence, meaning that the United States, in many ways, would have a lot of power and influence over the Zaporozhye power plant. And if that is to happen, that means that if any sort of escalation was to happen in the future, that could actually be used as a form of coercion against Russia, because the proposal is that the energy would be shared equally between Russia and Ukraine. I mean, why would Russia want to give something up that has been within its power and to a Western institution that would give it even more leverage over Russia if any sort of, I guess, disagreement was to happen? And why would Russia, who is now winning the war, also enter into any agreement that would have it, I guess, be exposed to Article 5 of NATO, when that's precisely the reason that they went into war to begin with, to make sure that NATO is kept far away from its borders so far as possible, and Ukraine being a particular weak point at that. And in Trump's proposal, as well as the European proposal, it says that if Ukraine is to attack Russia without cause, and they emphasize that, without cause, then Russia, then the security guarantee is considered void. But what is considered legally without cause? It could easily be justified. For example, they could find any pretext and do so. And then if Russia was to respond, now they're dealing with the totality of NATO, which is exactly what they didn't want in the first place. And so I don't even understand what both parties are thinking here. But at least when it comes to the United States also provided a more detailed analysis of territorial concessions, among other things. And it's very obvious that they're trying to provide, at the very least, a base by which to build on. But then the Europeans have come in and they're even trying to take the very small concessions that were made away. And they're so absolutist. And the insane here is Russia's winning this war. The US is aware of this, and they're trying to make their own, I guess they're trying to find a way how to manage this. And the Europeans were completely, I mean, they're in economic decline. They've got no military capacity. It's really the United States that's holding this entire front, have coming to make the even more, I guess, stringent and more rigid proposal to Russia, not recognizing how, respectfully, they're no longer an empire. They're no longer the power that can project this kind of influence on global events. And if anything, they're in one of the weaker positions here. And that's the most ridiculous aspect in all of this.
I mean, the absolute lack of hard power is astounding. Again, whole lot of confidence for them. And you've talked about the economic angle. Let's talk about the military angle, and not from like the front, like the actual fighting. The Russian military bloggers and propagandists basically overplay generally like territorial gains. The Ukrainians do the same thing, and the entire thing's pretty confused. But what's not confused is our supply chain issues. So this is how it works out. Most of NATO has like one or two production facilities in Poland, like Nitrochem, and I'm forgetting what the other one was. It's a former Nazi artillery production facility in Poland. In the finest traditions of NATO. But basically, there are two main theaters that our munitions go to. Ukraine is mostly about super high-tech weaponry like ATACMS and stuff like air defense artillery, electronic warfare systems, and massive amount of artillery shells. A lot of our artillery shells come from South Korea. But our bombs, the Mark 80 series, which is being dropped in Gaza, that comes from Poland. All right, so to kind of like break this down, you need what's called TNT or tritonal, which is a mixture of 80% TNT and an accelerant like aluminum powder, which amplifies the kinetic force from these bombs. Well, our last TNT facility was shut down in the 80s in the United States. So we haven't been able to make our own munitions to include RDX, even like C4 that like SWAT teams use or like special operations teams use to like blow open doors. Like we don't even produce any of that. We do not produce our own munitions. We get it from like one or super, super backed up or two super, super backed up facilities in Poland that account for 80 to 90% of our TNT production. So in an attempt to kind of like fix the supply chain and generate what we need to continue these wars and not like have to use taxpayer dollars to like hire these massive, like huge logistical companies because there are logistics companies that exist primarily to ship TNT to the United States so that we can put it into bombs and then use the same companies to like reship it to other countries over the world, like all over the world, like Israel. So there's this huge shortage and it's completely bottlenecked, just like AI data centers, by the amount of raw materials that we can get. So right now, the United States Army has awarded a contract to Repcon USA. Here, let me pull this up. Sorry, guys. Share screen. To fix our supply chain shortages and shortcomings. Because right now, the nitrochem facility, public figures, it can only produce about 12 tons of explosive material, the TNT. So every 2,000-pound bomb dropped on Gaza, just think about this, has a net explosive weight of about 950 pounds. So if they drop 12,000 bombs, that's like half their capacity for the entire year of what's earmarked towards the United States. So basically, we need it here and we need more to up our production facility. But like we're completely deindustrialized. So the US Army is giving this Turkish company, Repcon, two things. First, we're building a massive artillery shell production facility out in bumfuck Kentucky, all right, where no one's going to see it. And it's what Repcon is known for is for its filling technology, how you literally fill explosives and fabricate explosives with tritonal or RDX or whatever thing you're using. But it's a turnkey facility, which means it's basically designed to not have as few workers employed there and working as possible. Because a lot of these countries that Repcon operates in, like that's their shtick. They exist to be low maintenance, low human effort facilities. And that's kind of like what we need. Because of course we're completely deindustrialized. And I'm just breaking this down in the most simple terms. So they're going to handle our 155 artillery shell productions. And then they also, Repcon USA just announced in April, the acquisition of General Dynamics Ordnance and Tactical System in Garland, Texas, expanding its capabilities in defense and aerospace manufacturing. So what it's going to do is repurpose this General Dynamics facility, General Dynamics, who produces the Mark 80 series bombs, into one of these turnkey facilities as well. So there's a lot of pushback. There's a lot of people, Real Clear Defense, which is like a neocon hawk, should a country kind of like asking a question, because it's a Turkish company, should a country that supports Hamas hold leverage over the U.S. bomb supply? Now one does. Another defense contractor, Repcon USA, purchased the General Dynamics facility in Garland, Texas. So, we actually, even if we do try to reindustrialize, we actually physically can't do it. So we're having to bring in Turkey to into our defense sector to, I guess, help us out. And the thing is, none of this is going to happen. I am in Kentucky. I looked through all of these real estate databases, construction databases for commercial and residential and factory stuff. They haven't even discovered a site, and they haven't even started production on this facility. It's insane. It's going to take years. And this is a massive driver in policy, because we know that one of the main reasons that the ceasefire was kind of put into effect as a face-saving tool for Israel is because we didn't have anything left to send them. Biden put a restriction on the Mark 80 bombs for a week, at the end of his presidency. The supply has never stopped, whatever they've needed. And the push from the U.S. to go from mass high-intensity conflict stockpiles of just shells, unguided bombs, mortar shells, went from that World War II kind of style of warfare, which is kind of what we're looking at with the reintroduction of drones on the Ukraine-Russia front, right? So we don't have that anymore. What we've started doing in the Vietnam War after the capture of our government kind of in that era by the military-industrial complex was go after this idea of precision over saturation, so we can have these massive R&D, research and development contract awards to General Dynamics and Boeing and RTX Corps that, basically just allowed them to bring in a ton of government contract money for research and development for these precision munitions, and just use some of that for CEO benefits and, all sorts of stuff. That it was a complete scam, this idea of precision weapons. And along with that, because we weren't making a ton of like artillery shells or anything like that. We also offloaded all of our native production to other countries, and this is kind of what we're dealing with. But the issue with like that people need to understand, like all these imperial wars, they're always like against the working class because we're actually not going to like reindustrialize in a way that's going to benefit Americans. Like we picked this Turkish defense company specifically because their shtick is to not have workers at these factories. So, and again, this is going to take a long time to build. So this isn't happening anytime soon, which is why you're seeing like news articles about Venezuela. Yesterday, it was published, and Pete Hegseth put out a statement that we're going to like heighten operations in Venezuela, but it's not going to be like a bunch of targeted land strikes. It's going to be, they said it explicitly, it's going to be covert, clandestine operations in Venezuela. Because what are we going to do? We don't have the Navy stockpiles. Like Elina, you brought up that CSIS report from last year about how they did these war games over the Strait of Taiwan, and the U.S. Navy and military presence in Taiwan runs out of munitions in like less than 10 days. So behind all of this, like posturing and diplomacy and economic sanctions, like we don't really have like the military hard power to really do anything because we don't have the ordinance.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, I completely agree with you. This is what I argued from the very beginning. On the 10th of October, when the Gaza ceasefire happened, I said it very clearly from there and then. It's basically to set the stage in order to organize the other multi-front wars, let's just say whether covert or otherwise, that the United States needs to obviously take on in order to sustain their imperialist project abroad. Because Ukraine, as well as particularly Israel, have pretty much drained the entirety of the American sort of military capacity and their stockpiles. And in fact, I have some of the stats here as well. Beyond like obviously the report now on TNT has just come out in the last couple of days, where Israel has basically used up the vast majority of TNT that the West or the entirety of NATO needs in order to be able to manufacture the weapons, the bombs, etc., that they need in order to continue facilitating these wars. But on top of that, I mean, it was in September, the Pentagon had actually requested to boost production rates for 12 types of missiles it needs on hand, including Patriot interceptor missiles, Standard Missile 6, THAAD interceptors, and Joint Air Surface Standoff missiles. Right now, I also want to go back to the 12-day war between Iran and Israel. Just in a matter of 12 days, the United States blew through about a quarter of its supply of high-end THAAD missile interceptors. And the United States is only able to produce around 96 THAADs per year, and they use 100 to 150 through Israel in the war with Iran. That's one example. Between Israel and Ukraine, they've used up about a quarter of their Patriot missile interceptors as well. And when it comes to like even Tomahawk missiles, between again Iran and Yemen, through both small operations that the United States have conducted this year alone, they used almost about 100 Tomahawk missiles, and they only make about 55 to 90 per year. So we can see that they have a huge amount of stockpile issues. They don't even have the industrial capacity to be able to mass produce it. And in fact, if we were to go back to the CSIS report that I was talking to you about earlier on in our more private conversations, the report, yes, did say in a series of war games, this was actually from 2023, not even last year, it found that the United States would not even be able to last more than a week because they do not have enough long-range missiles, among other munitions, etc., to be able to win a Taiwan Strait war. This was in 2023. This was prior to October 7th. So we can only imagine the current state of the U.S. military capacity following the complete drain that Israel has been, as well as obviously Ukraine, when it comes to the American sort of military capacity and might. And we can also go back as well to what you said with regards to like, yes, they've deindustrialized, and that's why they're not even able to mass produce. And you made a point of, well, they can't really industrialize because it takes a lot of time and a lot of years. But most importantly, the United States cannot reindustrialize because it's a finance capital based economy. And if you're going to become an industrial economy again, that means you have to no longer become, you have to basically destroy a lot of your financial infrastructure and institutions. But most importantly, you can no longer afford to be the world's consumer in order to maintain the dollarization of the world. And that means that all their finance capital, the way that their entire economy is basically now being held by the Magnificent Seven, and especially Nvidia, which apparently is holding the entire American economy on its back with its stock market, I guess, pricing, generally its market cap overall. That would all cease to exist. And one of the main reasons that we saw this deindustrialization take place, and why the United States, in addition to the fact that, yes, deindustrialized, it also reduced its production of just basic, ammunition in the way that, we see China and Russia being able to produce, is because it was no longer profitable. And this tends to happen in capitalism. I mean, it's going back to the tendency of the rate of profit to fall. Producing your normal weapons and ammunition were not considered profitable. So they basically started to ship that off abroad. And they began investing in these precision guided missiles, all these fancy gadgets, in which is what they established the doctrine that you've spoke about, precision over mass. And they were selling this narrative to people that it's okay, we're not making as much, because actually our weapons are so sophisticated that we do not need to make as much. It was a lie. It was a myth. And that's now been destroyed. But the reason that they did that was because these expensive luxury, weapons,
F-35 project,
investment.
$1 trillion later, we have a shitty aircraft that's not good at anything.
Yeah, because now they were selling this to investors, and investors are putting money into the military industrial complex, into high tech companies. And what does that do? It builds their stock market bubble. It boosts the economy, which is all an illusion. It's all speculative in the United States, whilst not doing anything actually on a material basis for the economy. And now this is the situation. They can't afford these wars. I agree with you about Venezuela as well. That's why they're posturing, and now they're going to be dropping leaflets over Caracas. I don't know if you've seen that, but Trump is talking about dropping leaflets over Caracas like, the Israelis were doing over the Gaza Strip. I mean, it's getting ridiculous. You can see that they know they can't do more than what they're claiming. And, even I think it was the New York Times, I don't know, one of these main Western media mainstream media articles had actually published and said, I mean, even if we were to kill Maduro, in order to establish regime change in Venezuela, you need a long-standing military operation. Because there's still going to be resistance. The Bolivarian revolutionary drive within many Venezuelans is still present. It doesn't guarantee the new leadership is even going to be somebody who's going to be an American puppet. It doesn't mean that Maria Corina Machado is going to be able to come to power with ease. And they know they don't have enough the economic or military capacity for a long-standing operation when you've had Israel drain you and Ukraine drain you for even longer. And yeah, this is a situation now. They can't militarily do anything because their economic base can't do anything, and they're not going to industrialize because, well, they want to be a financial hub. They want their dollar to be able to dominate the world because that's how they've been exporting their crises abroad and sustaining their imperialist control. So these are the contradictions that are really exposing themselves for the United States, and why this is, and I'll just, to go back to Russia, because they're losing this war and they don't have any more military capacity. This is also why they want a ceasefire for now, because they need to build up their stockpiles again if they're going to continue this operation at some other point. So if anything, this might be they're trying to achieve a temporary pause whilst also guaranteeing through the Article 5 based security guarantee that this war will be continued at some later point when NATO is going to be better equipped.
I'd also like to bring up that for a high intensity conflict, our last big one, and when fighting like a major power, that's what we're talking about. Our last big one, we're building one artillery factory in Kentucky. During World War II, we had 145 factories, munitions factories. But yeah, we've got one in Garland, Texas for the bombs, and we've got one which doesn't even exist yet in Kentucky for the artillery shells. So yeah, that's not really even a push for like industrialization. That's just, I don't even know what they're trying. Well, we know what they're trying to accomplish, but again, like this is not something that's realistic at all. And they're going to keep. But you know what they are doing, and this has like full green lights. We're building one factory, great. But you know what we are doing? We're doing a sources sought notification for a 6th generation fighter craft. So boom, more R&D Ponzi, like scam money, baby. That's what we're going to look at. So I think how this is going to play out, I think Russia definitely does want some concessions, and I do think there's a general push to like end this war and consolidate their gains and everything like that. Basically what Europe's saying is completely unworkable. And I don't know. I always thought that this was going to end in a frozen conflict. I'm not so sure about that anymore. I do think
No,
like a peaceful is going to happen. I think there's we've come to a place where there's too many financial interests, and there's definitely maybe some real politic coming into some European leaders, but hedge fund world has been eyeing Ukraine for years, being like, when are we going to get in there? We can't have an ROI if there's not stability. We need some sort of stability in order to actually get in there and get this done.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. That's why I said, in my humble opinion, this is the situation. They're all aware that Russia's winning the war. They're all aware, based on all the reasons we've just outlined, that they don't have the military and economic capacity to continue funding this, especially when they're trying to organize. And they are also trying to, prepare themselves for a possible future confrontation with China, among other things. And then, like I said,
that's always,
with regards to Ukraine,
I'm sorry, I don't mean to like interrupt you or whatever, but I think we can accept now that the confrontation over Taiwan is just a pipe dream. That's just not going to happen.
It is. But I mean, they are trying to prepare themselves militarily because they do understand. This is the thing. The United States is at a point. I mean, their entire economy is basically AI speculation. That's going to burst at some point. They're losing a lot of economic power. They're losing their ability to sustain imperialism. And then you've got China that is increasingly and drastically growing and becoming a massive economic and even a military power that if you don't do something to stop them, it's endgame. But the thing is, there's no way they can stop them. It's pretty much the inevitable at this point. Like this is the conclusion. I don't like to be deterministic, but I'm just looking at it from the economics of it. This is how I see it. So they have no choice but to continue on this mission, which is why I feel like they're going to try and attempt these things. Now, with regards to Russia, they understand that they can no longer keep pushing because they don't have the capacity anymore. They run out of all the military options, and they don't have an industry to back up their operations. And actually, going back to again that CSIS report, it did say the next major war is not going to be won as a result of who has the biggest military power, but who has the biggest industrial capacity. And we can see the United States does not, NATO does not. So what they're trying to do is temporarily, they want to stop this war. They understand that Russia is in the winning position. So they're trying to make certain concessions by saying, right, you can keep Crimea, Luhansk, and which one's it? Donetsk. However, as well as obviously parts of Zaporozhye and Kherson that you've already taken. But, we'll deal with the neo-Nazi issue. You have to also make other concessions from some of the land, though. If you want to take those 5 key territories, the rest of the territory has to be back to Ukraine. But the most important thing is that security, Article 5 style security guarantee, which they'll probably use as pretext to continue a war at a later point. But in the meantime, what the U.S. is trying to establish is a pause for now, giving them the time to be able to militarily build up their stockpiles, trying to bring Russia back into the Western economic hemisphere so as to move them away from China, which is again another respectfully just a disillusion of their own. And they're trying to do it in a way that doesn't make the U.S. seem like they're at a loss, and also will give the U.S. the ability to make some money off of Ukraine, because Ukraine no longer, I've said this many times over the last 2-3 years, Ukraine doesn't exist anymore as a sovereign state. It is basically a financial colony of the U.S. I think it's a colony. It's been neo-colonized completely. Does not exist. It's just going to become a small colony next to Russia. That's it.
And we've seen that the U.S. will not, will not allow them to have any sort of autonomy going forward. They were just completely
No.
sidelined during these whole negotiations. Trump's like, I mean, that's kind of like even under. It wouldn't be this egregious under Biden because Biden was really sympathetic, but like under Trump, Trump's like, they're losers. I don't deal with losers. Why should losers have a seat at the table?
Yeah.
So and now it's like they lost. We're just going to send in my corporate raiders, my son-in-law Kushner, and Steve Witkoff, the real
Control
estate.
everything.
Yeah, so it's
Mhm.
ours now.
So that's what they're going to do. And the thing is, with Russia, it's very well aware as to how ridiculous as well the American proposal is. Obviously, not as nowhere near as ridiculous as that of the Europeans. That's just a joke. It was funny. I thought it was funny. I read it and I was laughing. If I'm being very honest, I'm like, this is outrageous. But so what Putin is doing, the reason, if you notice what Putin said in response to all of this, is it's a good starting point. Russia knows that it's in the negotiating, it has a negotiating advantage because it's winning. It's making gains every day. They're the more economically able out of all the parties involved. And they know that if they continue at this path, the U.S. will probably make even more concessions to end this right now. So I don't think, and this is what I've always argued, that I was always of the opinion there won't be a frozen conflict. I said that the U.S. would like that, but Russia does not. And Russia, because they're in the more dominant position here, they will make sure that that isn't the case. And all terms will have to be negotiated based on who's the winning party here, and that is Russia. So I don't see them accepting this. I do see that if they want this to come to some sort of end, there's going to have to be some major concessions, especially with that security Article 5 style security guarantee. That's definitely not going to sit well. Or the Zaporozhye, or giving the IAEA sort of power over the Zaporozhye power plant, which they can then use as economic leverage over Russia. Absolutely not, and the Europeans, by the way, for that matter. So I think there will be a probably end to this. How that will be, it will be dependent on what Russia says, and they are the like I said, they have the negotiating leverage here more in their favor.
Yeah, so I think like they're trying to give it the window dressing of like the Gaza ceasefire talks because they're trying to go to construct a narrative like he actually is the peacetime president. Like he's got a massive approval rating problem in the United States, and it's not just for the foreign wars. There's a lot of domestic stuff he wants going on. So like he wants a win. So they're trying to like package it as like, yeah, all this other stuff, the affordability crisis, the tariffs, absolutely didn't work. Doge, the Department of Government Efficiency, was a complete scheme that basically allowed Elon Musk to like destroy every government institution that was investigating his companies. Like there's so much going on domestically. He definitely wants a win, and they're trying to window dress and make it kind of like a template that you could associate with Trump. The 28-point Gaza plan, the 28-point, Ukraine plan that they both are overseen by like boards of peace, which basically will basically just enforce like neocolonialism on both parties. But unlike Gaza, who didn't have any political opposition, it was just the Israelis, and then Trump was like, "Stop," and they're like, "Okay, we have to." This one's going to be a lot more complicated, and guess what? It's not going to get sorted by Thanksgiving.
Oh no.
At all.
Oh no, it's just it's just Trump doing what he does. Like I give them to, I'm like, okay, and then what? I mean, can you really afford to keep funding it? No, you can't, right? You need BlackRock. BlackRock is out there who, I mean, essentially the entirety of the United States is owned by these finance corporations and these Silicon Valley giants. I mean, BlackRock is the largest company in the world. I mean, it collectively, it has, it has trillions in assets. So, I mean, if they're telling you, listen, we want the money that we can make out of Ukraine. We need to build this investment fund. We need investors to come in. We need to maintain our stock market bubble and our financial bubble. The whole speculation that back in the U.S. and this needs to come to some sort of stop. So we're going to do what's necessary right now, and then we can build ourselves up for the future. This is what it kind of boils down to, which is why we always have to follow the economics and understand how the U.S. financialized system and what it operates, what its incentives are, kind of will produce certain outcomes. And we're seeing that. We saw that in Gaza. We're seeing that in Ukraine. We're seeing it in Venezuela with all this posturing, but nothing really actually taking place beyond, covert operations, which will probably will not actually produce anything anyway. And, by the way, I just want to say something about as well, these, the rare earths that they want to control in Ukraine. There is no rare earth mining at all in Ukraine. And first of all, 60% of these rare earths are in the Russian held territories.
Yeah,
And
they're
that which is left.
they're in the
But this is the other
Donbass.
aspect. The rest of them that might be within the Ukrainian held territories, there's no mining infrastructure, and to establish that you need an average of 18 years. Even that is a colossal waste of time. But Trump is selling that narrative and making all these claims because it needs to show that there's some sort of win, but there's no real win
I
beyond
mean,
controlling like the
no,
pipelines and their companies.
we had that like super viral interview that Lindsey Graham gave. I forget which platform, it may have been CNN, where he's like, we need to control the Donbass because like if we don't
It
keep
was
this
Fox
war
News.
going, China's gonna Russia's gonna get access to it, then China's gonna get access to it. It's like, dude, yes, they exist, but just like in America, the reason we're not like doing any rare earth stuff is because we haven't built the infrastructure to do it. So cool. Like a lot of this is just like spectacle and face saving. Like if you do any amount of research, a lot of these narratives that are being pushed by establishment politicians and business leaders are absolute BS.
I mean, it's also the more interesting aspect about Lindsey Graham's interview there is like, okay, even if China was to get its hands on it, China has a monopoly on the production and refining of rare earths. They really don't need Ukraine's rare earth minerals, nor to spend how many years they're, even setting up the infrastructure to start mining it. And also, okay, even if the United States gets their hands on Ukrainian rare earths, which again will take almost about 2 decades, well, you're most likely going to have to send that over to China unless you obviously start, refining your own industry back in the US. This whole thing is just nonsensical, honestly. It's short-term gains. This is what it's always about. They're just looking for ways to make short-term gains and to try to counter the inevitable, which is, I guess, the economic collapse or the chaos that's going to ensue when the AI bubble eventually erupts. This is what they're trying to counter right now. Stopping the war in Ukraine, quick money to be made. A lot of money is going to be rushing in to these companies, a lot of private equity investment companies, these funds, real estate, you name it. All of these companies are going to start making a short-term gains, but massive gains in the interim. And then they're going to try to reorganize and remobilize for the future. This is what it's about. But it's not sustainable in the long run.
It never is. And yeah, I think a lot of people are starting to wake up to the fact that the entire US economy is just like one scam piled on another. If this was really about national security, we would never have like deindustrialized in the first place. And if this was really about national security, we would be actually going through some short-term pain and some short-term losses in order to actually build factories that will actually be able to supply our military with actual usable munitions on the battlefield. But that's not what we're about. That's just rhetoric to cover for the military, industrial, media, and academic complex. And it's all lies to protect, capital. And I think it's interesting seeing a lot of people waking up to this. I actually wish there wasn't so much like Russophobia in Europe. So like the working class in Europe could actually understand how screwed they're getting by this like European Union, like NATO jingoism. But again, that's why I say all of these imperial wars are a war on the transnational working class. So that's kind of what we're seeing now. And we're going to see this drama play out. And these negotiations will probably take some time. And whoever comes out on top, you won't be one of them, guys. So we
Always
are
on a positive note, Greg. Always on a
always
positive note.
always on a positive note. So thanks so much for Elina for coming on to talk about the economic angle of this. We definitely we got a chance to examine the other aspect of hard power, which is the military part. And it's just, again, not sustainable, but we're going to keep hitting that button. It kind of reminds me of, the cocaine study in the 80s? Do you want like actually more water, or just going to keep hitting that button, for next year's quarterly return? More. And collapse is inevitable. Who knows when it's going to happen? But yeah, we're already walking back our engagements with Venezuela and everything like that. So this is what hopefully we are able to cover why, and we will post your links in your Substack in the description where everybody can check out her articles. And we will see you next week on State of Play to discuss whatever catastrophe happens over the weekend. Thanks so much for coming on, and we will see you next week.